What they're hiding from you, Blake Lively, and this audio that surfaced just yesterday have completely shifted the tone of the entire conversation surrounding her lawsuit. It all started because of Clark, or as the internet calls him, the amazing Clark Kent. No one really knows who Clark is, but what they did is impressive. They went straight to the recorder's office, to the clerk, and somehow got a copy of this long-rumored audio file. Now, for months, there were whispers that something explosive was mentioned in the lawsuit, and that this very audio was at the center of it all. I realize that Blake herself references this same recording multiple times throughout her legal filings, specifically in her 47.1 motion. In that motion, she repeatedly points to the audio as her proof, claiming it shows that there was a deliberate plan to destroy her, both personally and professionally. In her version of events, this recording allegedly demonstrates that the opposing side, particularly Steve Sarowitz and others, were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to tear her down. She ties this recording directly to her claims of retaliation, which she argues are the foundation of her case. Now, retaliation is a major component in employment law. It's one of the most serious accusations you can make. Blake is trying to connect multiple strands here. On one hand, she claims that these lawsuits and motions filed against her are acts of retaliation. On the other, she insists they form part of a wider pattern of discrimination and workplace hostility. But when you really look at the evidence, the timeline, and the content of this audio, her entire argument starts to crumble. C. She also alleges that Steve Sarowitz made a threat that he supposedly said he would destroy her family with $100 million, and that he would leave behind 2 dead bodies. Blake paints this as a violent, real-world threat, almost as if her safety was an immediate danger. But when you actually listen to the audio, that's not what happens. Sarowitz wasn't issuing a threat. He was laughing when he said it. It was clearly said in a different context, not with malice, but frustration mixed with sarcasm. Yet, Blake's team wants the public to believe it was some sinister remark tied to her allegations of sexual harassment. That's where the narrative starts to fracture. Because now, thanks to the audio's timestamp, which Clark found and confirmed, we know the exact date it was recorded, August 29th. And according to the official Wayfair timeline of relevant events, Blake had not filed or even discussed any sexual harassment complaints during that period. None. Zero. So if the statement had nothing to do with harassment, what was really going on around that time? Here's where things get interesting. Around mid-August, there was a massive behind-the-scenes blow-up, a near-court confrontation between the parties. In that same conversation, Sarowitz tells Claire that he almost got brought into court a couple of weeks ago. If you backtrack from August 29th, a couple of weeks ago would put us around August 12th. So what happened then? That was the day Blake and Ryan drafted and sent a proposed public statement. A statement they wanted Wayfair and everyone associated with the film to sign. It was supposed to be a show of accountability. But when you read it closely, it's more like a PR move to control the narrative. According to sources in the documents, this was a statement written by Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds themselves, not by any legal representative of Wayfair. And the statement said, "It ends with us was a troubled production, and we take full accountability for that. We are deeply sorry to everyone we upset, both privately and publicly." Blake Lively, Colleen Hoover, and the entire cast and crew led with professionalism every step of the way, and any negativity aimed at them is ours to own. Now, let's pause here for a moment. This statement, while polished, is actually loaded. It's asking Wayfair and others to publicly admit fault, to shoulder all the negativity that had been building online, and to claim that they were the ones responsible for the chaos surrounding the movie's production. But here's the thing that's not true. Even insiders said the crew didn't hate anyone, nor did they believe this vague self-blame narrative. At the time, the real issue wasn't harassment. It was marketing how the film was being promoted, who controlled the messaging, and who got to speak on behalf of the project. At the time all of this was happening, the cast wasn't even promoting the film together. That's what really set off alarm bells. There had already been weeks of tension between Blake, director Justin Baldoni, and the team at Wayfair. Everyone knew there was a mutual agreement to keep them separate during promotions, but no one was really saying why. Behind the scenes, that statement Ryan and Blake drafted was part of a bigger PR strategy. It was less about taking accountability and more about taking control of the message, the headlines, and ultimately public sympathy. They wanted to shape the story before the story shaped them. Their statement continued, "We've always said we're not perfect. Even if we make mistakes unintentionally, we will always own them. We hold ourselves accountable. That's what it means to be man enough. We're learning and growing from this experience, and we thank everyone for giving us the space to do so." Sounds polished, right? But it's also incredibly vague that IT never once specifies what they're taking responsibility for. It doesn't mention any incident complaint or even conflict. Instead, it's a carefully crafted piece of PR language saying everything without actually saying anything. Wayfair's legal team immediately saw through it. Their response was essentially, "Hold on, what exactly are we apologizing for?" Because to them, this wasn't about workplace misconduct or harassment. It was about a film that was becoming a marketing nightmare. See, around that same time, the media backlash was growing and fast. Blake and Ryan's approach to promoting It Ends With Us was confusing the audience. What was supposed to be a powerful, emotional drama about domestic violence was suddenly being marketed like a bubbly rom-com. Pink florals, pastel posters, bright smiles, it all clashed with the heavy themes of the story. And it didn't help that Blake was pushing her own brand, Betty Buzz and Betty Booze, during press appearances, or that she kept making lighthearted jokes about the film's darker content. Critics and fans noticed. Social media erupted. That's when the backlash hit full force, and it was directed squarely at Blake. She became the face of every headline criticizing the tone-deaf marketing and the disconnect between the film's subject matter and its promotion. Instead of addressing that disconnect, Blake and Ryan apparently wanted Wayfair to absorb the fallout to say publicly, "It's our fault, not hers." But according to internal emails later shown in court, Wayfair and its producers didn't agree. They knew this wasn't their doing. The tension wasn't about harassment. It was about creative control. Wayfair had financed the film, owned the IP, and had the final say in how it was marketed. But Blake and Ryan wanted more power not just as star and producer, but as narrative controllers. They wanted to steer the story in the media. That's when things began to unravel further. Melissa Nathan, one of the executives involved, texted that the situation had gotten out of hand. She reportedly told a colleague, "They need to lawyer up now." Then came a line that would define this dispute. "If you don't put out this statement, the gloves will come off." That wasn't a legal warning. That was a threat, a PR threat. The kind of line meant to say, "We'll destroy you publicly if you don't cooperate." So when Steve Sarowitz later said he would protect the studio like Israel protects itself from Hamas, it wasn't about violence, it was about defense. It was about protecting his company and reputation against a coordinated PR attack. And that's the key context Blake's filings leave out. When she cites this audio in her legal motion, she frames it as evidence of retaliation, as if Sarowitz was threatening her after she raised workplace concerns. But the truth is, that conversation wasn't about workplace misconduct at all. It was about marketing, public image, and a bitter struggle over who would control the story. Wayfair's documents even show internal discussions about this very issue. They debated how to handle the growing PR chaos. They weighed whether to involve legal counsel. They knew they were being cornered. So when Sarowitz stepped in, it wasn't to intimidate anyone, it was to make a decision about how to respond to a brewing public crisis. And here's what's telling. When the audio was finally referenced in court filings, Wayfair didn't even address it in their response to Blake's 47.1 sanctions motion. They didn't refute it, didn't quote it, didn't mention it, because they knew it didn't matter legally. It wasn't relevant to claims of harassment or retaliation. It was just noise or distraction meant to evoke emotion and frame Sarowitz as the villain. But Blake's team understood something. Public opinion often matters more than courtroom logic. If they could shape the public narrative, if they could make people feel like the case was about retaliation, they could keep sympathy on their side. So they tried to seal the full audio, claiming it contained private and sensitive information. But when you listen to it, there's nothing private or sensitive about it. There's no personal trauma discussed, no confidential HR details. It's a business conversation, tense, emotional, but not criminal. The final draft of the statement Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds wanted Wayfair to release sounded noble, polished, and deeply misleading. It read, "We take full accountability. It's not anyone's job, but ours that's part of being man enough. We will practice what we preach. We are learning and growing from this experience, and we thank everyone for their patience as we find a better way to proceed. We are very proud of this film and the way it's been received. Part of our work is to have uncomfortable conversations for public growth. The film does that on screen, and we are doing that off screen. Thank you to the cast, crew, and the public for giving us the space to learn and grow with humanity and dedication." On the surface, it sounded like the kind of humble apology or reflection Hollywood loves a message about accountability, growth, and imperfection. But when you look closer, the statement doesn't actually say anything specific. It's vague to the point of emptiness. There's no mention of what they're taking responsibility for, who was wrong, or what the problem even was. And that's where things start to unravel. When Jenny L., a representative working between production and the PR team, passed this proposed statement to Melissa Nathan, one of the Wayfair executives. Melissa's response was immediate and blunt. They need to lawyer up now. To Melissa, this wasn't a heartfelt apology. It was a liability trap. Because if Wayfair released that statement, it would look like a public admission of guilt for something undefined, something that could easily be interpreted as workplace misconduct, discrimination, or even harassment. Then came the most telling part, the warning. If you don't put out this statement, the gloves will come off. That wasn't just frustration, it was pressure. A strategic move to make Wayfair take the fall for a storm they didn't create. The truth is, this accountability statement wasn't about accountability at all. It was about damage control, and more importantly, image control. At that point, the backlash around It Ends With Us was reaching a fever pitch. The production had already been painted as troubled. Headlines focused on the tension between Blake and director Justin Baldoni, the abrupt halts in filming, and the lack of promotional unity between the stars. But the real spark for the public backlash wasn't what happened on set, it was what happened after. Blake and Ryan were being criticized for how they handled the film's marketing. Viewers and fans were confused. The movie, adapted from Colleen Hoover's best-selling novel about domestic violence and healing, was being presented like a pastel-colored romantic comedy. The tone of the trailers, the promotional photos, and even Blake's social media posts clashed completely with the serious message of the source material. Instead of leading thoughtful discussions about trauma and resilience, Blake was promoting her Betty Buzz and Betty Boo's beverage lines, sometimes even naming cocktails after the film's abuser character as a marketing joke. What was supposed to be a somber, heartfelt drama was suddenly being turned into a lifestyle brand campaign. Critics didn't hold back. Social media users called the approach tone-deaf, exploitative, and self-centered. And instead of addressing those criticisms head-on, Blake and Ryan's team apparently decided the best strategy was to redirect the blame. That's where Wayfair came in. In the statement they wanted released, phrases like, "We take full accountability," and "We are proud of film and the way it's been received," were meant to smooth everything over and make it sound as though the studio was taking responsibility for vague mistakes while leaving Blake and Ryan untouchable. But to Wayfair's lawyers, that wording was dangerous. There was no mention of specific incidents, no reference to workplace safety, misconduct, or legal compliance. Yet the tone suggested moral wrongdoing. It would have made it seem like Wayfair was apologizing for something serious, without admitting what that something was. Behind closed doors, Wayfair's team discussed what this could mean. They didn't want to take responsibility for creative choices or PR decisions that weren't theirs. The real issue wasn't a hostile work environment. It was a marketing misfire. Blake and Ryan wanted Wayfair to take the bullet for the backlash over how they promoted the film, how they separated from Justin, and how they handled the press. When the media started asking, why aren't Blake and Justin promoting together? Or, why does Blake keep downplaying the film's domestic violence theme? The answers never came. Instead, Blake continued to talk about her products and her family, while Ryan subtly tied the film's messaging to his own branding empire. Justin Baldoni, on the other hand, took a different route. He stayed calm, kind, and respectful in every interview. When asked about Blake, he avoided negativity. He spoke thoughtfully about the story, the meaning of the film, and the importance of its message. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. That's why the public backlash grew so fast it didn't look like a divided team. It looked like a cover-up. The audience felt they were being marketed dishonestly, and that sense of manipulation fueled the outrage. Behind the scenes, Wayfair executives began to realize that Blake and Ryan's request for a public accountability statement wasn't just about saving the film's reputation. It was about rewriting the narrative. They wanted to shift perception from Blake mishandled the film's promotion to Wayfair failed to protect the film and its star. But the truth was clear in internal communications. Wayfair hadn't orchestrated the film's image. They had funded it, yes, but the creative and PR direction came heavily from Blake and Ryan's own team. The pastel visuals, the romanticized tone, and the floral fantasy aesthetic were all their creative choices. So, when Melissa Nathan read that proposed statement, she didn't see an apology. She saw a trap. If Wayfair put their name on it, they would be implicitly admitting fault for a situation that wasn't theirs to own. And more dangerously, they would be giving Blake's legal team ammunition, a written, public admission they could later spin as evidence of retaliation or discrimination. That's why Melissa's words, "lawyer up now," carried so much weight. She understood that what looked like a harmless PR statement could easily be used in court later on. Inside Wayfair's offices, tension was rising. Emails were flying back and forth between executives, lawyers, and PR teams trying to make sense of what was happening. Why were Blake and Ryan insisting on a statement that said everything and nothing at the same time? What were they really trying to achieve? The general consensus was that this wasn't about accountability, it was about public image management. The backlash against Blake had gotten personal, and her team was desperate to contain it before it tanked the film's release. But here's the key detail: this entire dispute had nothing to do with protected activity, sexual harassment, or discrimination. It was about publicity, ego, and reputation. The film's behind-the-scenes drama had spilled into the public eye, and Blake Lively had become the lightning rod for criticism. The public narrative shifted from Blake Lively stars in a powerful adaptation to Blake Lively mishandles the message. Fans and critics alike began questioning everything. Why was Blake promoting Betty Buzz cocktails on a red carpet for a film about abuse? Why did she keep calling the movie fun and uplifting when the story dealt with trauma and generational violence? Why did she distance herself from Justin Baldoni, who spent months emphasizing the seriousness and sensitivity of the subject matter? These weren't minor PR blunders, they were full-blown contradictions. And in Hollywood, contradictions invite speculation. Blake's team, aware that the narrative was slipping out of their hands, scrambled to control it. That's why they approached Wayfair with the accountability statement. They wanted to reframe the backlash as a shared studio failure, not a personal one. If Wayfair took responsibility, it would dilute the blame aimed at Blake and shift the public's focus away from her actions. But the executives at Wayfair saw it differently. From their perspective, the statement didn't just fail to clarify, it created new questions. If they released it, journalists would immediately ask, accountable for what? What mistake were they referring to? What exactly were they apologizing for? Was there some deeper misconduct they were hiding? And that's the danger with vague apologies in Hollywood. A statement like that can turn a PR problem into a legal one. Melissa Nathan, understanding the stakes, made her stance clear. This isn't about empathy, it's about liability. We can't sign off on this. Then came the real breaking point: the gloves will come offline. That's the moment the entire tone of the negotiation changed. What had started as a PR discussion suddenly felt like a threat. In corporate terms, that phrase isn't a throwaway expression. It's a warning. Play ball or we'll take this public. And if there's one thing studios fear more than lawsuits, it's bad headlines. A single leak to the press suggesting Wayfair refused to take accountability could tank their stock, damage investor confidence, and jeopardize future partnerships. But Wayfair held firm. They refused to publish the statement. Internally, they began documenting every communication, every email, every version of the statement proposal. They knew this wasn't over. Meanwhile, the online chatter around Blake only intensified. Fans started digging through old interviews, comparing her words to the tone of the film. When she said things like, "It's a story about love and strength," or "We want to make something beautiful," people accused her of trivializing abuse. Then came the controversy about Ryan Reynolds allegedly contributing to film's writing during the Hollywood writers' strike, something that raised ethical questions and violated strike protocols. Blake later admitted Ryan helped shape parts of the dialogue, which critics argue was hypocritical since other productions had been shut down during the strike for far less. That revelation poured gasoline on an already raging fire. Suddenly, the backlash wasn't just about tone, it was about integrity. And once again, Blake's team looked to redirect the blame. The easiest target? The studio. They argued that Wayfair and production team should have guided the marketing better, that they should have helped Blake navigate the film's sensitive topics more carefully. But internally, Wayfair had records showing the opposite, that Blake's team had full creative freedom and repeatedly dismissed notes about tone and presentation. It became clear this wasn't a case of negligence from the studio. It was a case of creative overreach from the star. Now, let's look at what really happened when the press began asking questions like, why aren't Blake and Justin promoting the film together? Wayfair's PR department issued a neutral statement saying that the cast had mutually agreed to promote the film separately in an attempt to cool tensions. But that only fueled curiosity. The separation looked like a silent feud. Every photo, every red carpet moment, every interview was analyzed under a microscope. Justin Baldoni continued to do his job. He answered questions about directing, praised Blake's performance, and kept the focus on the story. Meanwhile, Blake seemed to go out of her way to avoid mentioning Justin at all. That imbalance painted a very specific picture, one of disconnection, tension, and mistrust. Critics picked up on it. They called it awkward, cold, and unprofessional. Entertainment blogs published speculative pieces with titles like "What Happened Between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni?" and "Behind the Set Tensions of It Ends With Us." Every day, the PR situation worsened. And that's when Blake and Ryan's proposed accountability statement started to make sense, not as an act of humility, but as an act of self-preservation. By having Wayfair release a vague apology, they could publicly reframe the chaos as a learning experience. It would make it seem as though everyone, not just Blake, had made mistakes. It would water down the criticism and make her look gracious for moving forward. But legally, it was a landmine. If Wayfair signed off on a statement that implied guilt without clarifying the nature of the mistake, it could be interpreted as an admission in future litigation. It could also give Blake's legal team leverage in her claims of retaliation. Wayfair wasn't willing to take that risk. As the situation spiraled further, what became clear to insiders was that this was never about harassment, it was about control. Control over the film, control over the narrative, and control over how the public perceived it. When Blake and Ryan pushed for that vague accountability statement, it wasn't to protect anyone, it was to protect themselves. They wanted to take command of the story before it took command of them. But once Wayfair refused to comply, the tension grew into a silent war, one that would eventually threaten to spill into the courtroom. What's fascinating is how this internal power struggle later got spun into something completely different. When you listen to the leaked audio now, it's obvious what's going on. This was a moral or legal standoff about harassment. It was a business fight about marketing strategy and public image. Blake and Ryan's frustration came from one thing. They didn't own the IP. They couldn't control how Wayfair positioned or promoted the film, and that drove them insane. For two people used to commanding their own brand narratives, from fashion to interviews to social media campaigns, that loss of control was unbearable. So, when the backlash over Blake's promotional choices hit, they were desperate to redirect blame. Instead of taking the criticism for how she marketed End With Us like a romantic comedy, Blake's team reframed the chaos as something deeper, something darker. They began hinting that the conflict wasn't about PR at all, but about protected activity and retaliation. But if you follow the paper trail, the emails, texts, and internal memos, it tells a very different story. Inside Wayfair, people were baffled. Executives like Steve Sarowitz, the financier behind the project, were watching this feud escalate from a disagreement into a full-blown standoff. He had invested heavily in the film and expected a professional collaboration. Instead, he found himself pulled into a tug-of-war between the creative talent and the production team. According to internal communications later reviewed in Discovery, Sarowitz repeatedly expressed frustration to Claire and others at Wayfair. His messages made it clear this wasn't about misconduct or mistreatment. It was about a power struggle over marketing and creative control. Wayfair had its own marketing blueprint, a carefully structured rollout that fit their brand's reputation and legal guidelines. Blake and Ryan, however, had their own plan, one that centered Blake as the face of the campaign, aligning the movie with her personal lifestyle brand. They wanted to push the Betty Buzz tie-ins, use bright visuals, and lean into romantic, almost Barbie-core imagery. To them, that was smart marketing. It attracted Blake's existing fan base. But to Wayfair, it was tone deaf. The film was adapted from a story about domestic abuse and generational trauma. The marketing needed to respect that, not glamorize it. That's where the conflict exploded. Blake's side believed Wayfair's more restrained approach made the movie look depressing and unmarketable. Wayfair believed Blake's pink-tinted, bubbly PR strategy trivialized the subject matter. Both were stubborn, both were confident they were right, and neither wanted to compromise. Then came the breaking point: the audience backlash. After the trailer and first promotional photos dropped, the internet reacted immediately. Fans of the original book were horrified by the tone. They accused the film of turning a deeply emotional story into a romantic comedy. Social media filled with comments like, "Why does this look like a Hallmark movie about abuse? And this is not the story we loved." For Blake and Ryan, that backlash was personal. Their creative fingerprints were all over that marketing, from the color schemes to the press messaging. They felt exposed, criticized, and publicly humiliated. So what did they do? They looked for a scapegoat. Wayfair became that scapegoat. Behind closed doors, discussions between Blake's camp and Wayfair grew heated. Multiple sources later revealed that Ryan himself was deeply involved, even though, officially, he wasn't part of the production team. His influence was undeniable. He reportedly joined the calls, reviewed statements, and at one point, insisted that Wayfair owned the mistake in public to save the project's reputation. But Wayfair wasn't budging. They refused to sign off on a statement that effectively said, "We messed up," when they hadn't. That's when things turned ugly. Melissa Nathan, Wayfair's PR consultant, told them bluntly that they should lawyer up. She saw the tone of the conversation change from negotiation to threat. She later described how Blake and Ryan's rep said, "If you don't put out the statement, the gloves will come off." That wasn't metaphorical. It was a promise of public warfare. From that moment, Wayfair understood the situation had shifted from PR management to legal defense. They started documenting everything, every phone call, every revision, every comment. They even looped in their attorneys to protect themselves from potential defamation or contract breach claims. Sarowitz, caught in the middle, had to make a decision: defend his company or cave to celebrity pressure. He chose to defend. And that's why, when Blake's later legal filings tried to frame this dispute as retaliation for her protected activity, Wayfair didn't even flinch. They knew exactly what the audio was about: a marketing feud, not a harassment issue. They chose to ignore it publicly because acknowledging it would give legitimacy to a false narrative. From a legal standpoint, Wayfair's silence was strategic. The audio wasn't relevant. It didn't prove harassment, retaliation, or discrimination. It simply showed that two powerful public figures, Blake and Ryan, were trying to manipulate a PR situation in their favor and threatening litigation when the studio didn't comply. Internally, Wayfair executives even referred to the audio as a red herring. It was something meant to distract, to muddy the waters, to make a simple business disagreement look like something far more sinister. And it worked, at least in the court of public opinion. One snippet of the recording surfaced online. Fans started speculating wildly. Blake's supporters claimed it was proof she was silenced or retaliated against. But anyone who actually understood the context knew the truth. The recording captured a PR standoff, not an act of retaliation. Still, perception is power in Hollywood, and Blake knows how to wield it. She and Ryan have built their careers on image control. They know that a well-timed leak or an emotional post can shift narratives faster than any courtroom ruling. So when they started using language like protected activity, retaliation, and unsafe environment, they reframed what was essentially a creative disagreement into a moral battle. It painted Wayfair as a villain and positioned Blake as a courageous whistleblower when in reality, the whistle was over who got control of the poster design and press narrative. Wayfair's lawyers, of course, weren't playing along. They filed responses meticulously outlining the timeline of events, how the statement predated any alleged protected activity, how the disputes all centered around marketing decisions, and how every threat from Blake's team coincided with moments of negative press coverage. Their defense was simple: this isn't retaliation, it's resistance to manipulation. By the time it nearly reached court, both sides were exhausted. Blake and Ryan's legal team realized they couldn't prove retaliation without conflating unrelated issues. Wayfair's side, on the other hand, wanted to move on but refused to let their reputation be tarnished by false claims. That's why the audio, the supposed smoking gun, never actually mattered in court. It wasn't ignored because it was incriminating. It was ignored because it was irrelevant. At its core, it was proof of something else entirely: that Hollywood's biggest battles often have nothing to do with morality and everything to do with ego, optics, and power. For months, Blake's team insisted that the now infamous audio recording proved everything: that Steve Sarowitz and Wayfair acted out of spite, that their later decisions were born of vengeance, and that the tone of that private conversation revealed an industry titan plotting to destroy her. But when you strip away the emotional framing, the supposed smoking gun turns out to be nothing more than a sparkler. If you look at it from Wayfair's perspective, the situation was absurd. Imagine you are the studio that financed the entire production, fronted the cash, hired the crew, owned the intellectual property, and carried the legal liability, and now a celebrity couple who never invested a dime suddenly behaves as though they were the studio heads. They want final say on editing. They want to control the marketing rollout. They even want the press narrative written in their voice. It's not just overreach, it's takeover theater. And then, when that power play backfires, when their marketing choices trigger a public backlash, they pivot and say, "This is proof you retaliated against us." That leap of logic is what stunned industry observers. How can any jury possibly connect those dots? Blake and Ryan's public image had always been built on the illusion of autonomy. They were a Hollywood power couple who supposedly handcrafted every project, personally oversaw creative choices, and treated the entertainment machine like an extension of their own brand. But It Ends With Us wasn't their property. Wayfair Studios owned the IP, the footage, and the distribution rights. They were the ones who risked capital, who stood to lose millions if things went wrong. Yet, in interviews and online posts, Blake and Ryan spoke as if this were their passion project, one they had brought to life. The reality was simpler. They were talent, not producers. The final call on editing, budget, and marketing did not belong to them. That tension between perception and contract was the seed of every later dispute. When Wayfair rejected their request to issue that vague accountability statement, Blake's team saw it as an act of defiance. From Wayfair's standpoint, it was simply them exercising the rights they'd paid for. By the time the audio conversation happened, Wayfair executives were under immense pressure. Their parent company was preparing for an IPO. Every headline mattered. A feud with an A-list actress could spook investors. So, when Sarowitz made his now famous comment half joking, half exasperated about defending the studio like Israel defends itself, it wasn't a threat. It was business frustration, the kind that happens behind closed doors when reputations are on the line. Yet, in Blake's filings, that same conversation was rebranded as evidence of malice and retaliation. It's a narrative that relies on confusion. By blurring the line between creative disagreement and personal hostility, the argument gains emotional power, but legally, it collapses under scrutiny. When the motion for sanctions under Rule 47.1 landed on the judge's desk, Wayfair's lawyers didn't even mention the audio. To outsiders, that seemed like a strange omission, but legally, it was a masterstroke. Their silence wasn't avoidance. It was confidence. They knew the audio was irrelevant to the claims at issue. Why dignify a sideshow? In their official filings, Wayfair clarified exactly why they stayed quiet.